The HOA president's perfectly manicured lawn began to crack at dawn. First one, then 10, then dozens of tiny holes appeared across her prized Kentucky bluegrass. Karen Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, watching in horror as her yard transformed into something from a nightmare. What she didn't know was that her neighbor had spent 6 months planning this moment ever since Karen had called Maria's garden decorations tacky immigrant nonsense and demanded their removal. Now, 200 new residents were about to make Karen's life a living hell, and Maria's quiet smile held a secret that would bring the entire neighborhood to its knees. The morning sun cast golden rays across Willowbrook Estates, illuminating the pristine lawns and meticulously maintained flower beds that made the subdivision a beacon of suburban perfection. Maria Santos knelt beside her prized rose garden, carefully adjusting the small ceramic figurines that dotted the landscape like colorful sentinels. A tiny mariachi band played silent music near the fountain, while hand-painted butterflies seemed to dance among the blooms on delicate wire stems. "Just beautiful, am I more?" she whispered to the small ceramic angel that had belonged to her grandmother, its weathered face catching the morning light. Maria had inherited more than just decorations from her abuela. She'd inherited a deep connection to the earth, to growing things, and to the old ways that most people had forgotten. "Absolutely hideous." The sharp voice cut through the morning peace like a blade. Maria looked up to see Karen Mitchell striding across the perfectly edged lawn. Her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, clipboard clutched in her manicured hands. As president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, Karen had appointed herself the neighborhood's moral guardian, and her expression suggested she'd found something deeply offensive. "Excuse me." Maria rose slowly, brushing soil from her gardening gloves. Karen's grey eyes swept over the garden with undisguised disgust. "These are trinkets. They are completely inappropriate for a neighborhood of this caliber. The HOA has standards, Mrs. Santos. This isn't some tacky immigrant flea market." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She felt her breath catch, her chest tightening with a familiar shame she'd hoped to leave behind years ago. "They are family heirlooms. My grandmother, I don't care if they belong to the Queen of England," Karen interrupted, consulting her clipboard. Section 4.3 of our covenant clearly states that all yard decorations must be approved by the Architectural Committee. These are things that certainly weren't approved. Maria's neighbor, Janet Powell, emerged from behind her own rose bushes, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Karen, maybe we could discuss this privately." "No." Karen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The rules exist for a reason. They maintain our property values and preserve the aesthetic integrity of our community. I won't have Willowbrook looking like some border town cantina." The casual cruelty of the comment made Maria's hands tremble. She'd lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, had been the first to welcome new residents, had organized block parties and volunteered for school fundraisers. She'd thought she belonged here. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maria said quietly, "my husband and I pay our HOA fees. We maintain our property. These decorations harm no one, they harm our reputation," Karen snapped. "When the Hendersons put their house on the market last month, 3 potential buyers specifically mentioned concerns about the neighborhood's declining character. I traced those concerns directly to complaints about your display." Janet stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Karen, that's enough. Maria's garden is beautiful. Those decorations are art." Karen's laugh was brittle and cold. "Art? They are cheap ceramic junk that belongs in a garage sale, not in a respectable neighborhood. I'm issuing a formal violation notice. Mrs. Santos has 30 days to remove all unauthorized decorations or face fines." She thrust an official-looking document at Maria, who took it with numb fingers. The paper felt heavy, weighted with the power to destroy something precious. "This is my home," Maria whispered. "These are my memories." "Then perhaps you should have chosen a more appropriate neighborhood for your memories," Karen replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Somewhere that better suits your background." The silence that followed was deafening. Janet gasped audibly, and even Karen seemed to realize she'd crossed a line. But instead of apologizing, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. 30 days, Mrs. Santos. The violation stands. Karen turned on her heel and strode away, her heels clicking against the sidewalk like a countdown timer. Maria stood frozen, the violation notice crumpling in her shaking hands. The ceramic angel at her feet seemed to weep in the morning light. Maria, I'm so sorry, Janet whispered, moving to her friend's side. She had no right to say those things. But Maria wasn't listening. She was remembering her grandmother's stories, tales of women who'd been underestimated, who'd faced cruelty with patience and cunning. Abuela had survived the revolution, had buried 3 husbands, had raised 7 children through the Depression. She'd taught Maria that sometimes the earth itself could be an ally. That afternoon, Maria stood in her garden, surrounded by her treasures. The mariachi band played their silent songs, the butterflies danced on their wires, and the angel watched with knowing eyes. She could remove them, pack them away, surrender to Karen's casual cruelty. Or she could remember who she was. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter Rosa, away at college. Mom, saw the neighborhood Facebook drama. Are you okay? Don't let that witch break you. Maria smiled, her first genuine smile since the morning's confrontation. Rosa had inherited her great-grandmother's spirit, her refusal to bow to bullies. But she'd also inherited something else, a deep knowledge of the old ways, passed down through generations of women who'd learned to work with nature rather than against it. That evening, Maria sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by old books and notebooks filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting. Recipes, remedies, and something else, instructions for dealing with those who brought harm to a family's peace. She opened her laptop and began to type, her fingers moving with growing confidence. The first email went to the county extension office. The second to the local university's entomology department. The third to a specialty supplier in Texas. Run by a woman who understood that some problems required unconventional solutions. As she worked, Maria's decorations seemed to watch approvingly from the garden. The angel's face caught the porch light, and for a moment, it almost looked like it was smiling. 3 days later, the packages began arriving. Small boxes, carefully labeled, containing what looked like ordinary soil amendments and organic fertilizers. Maria accepted each delivery with gracious thanks, signing for shipments that would transform her quiet suburban street into a battlefield. Karen Mitchell, watching from her living room window, felt a flutter of unease. Something about Maria's calm acceptance of the violation notice troubled her. In her experience, people either fought back immediately or crumbled completely. This quiet resignation felt different. Dangerous. But Karen pushed the feeling aside. She had work to do, a neighborhood to protect. The next morning, she stood on her back deck, surveying her perfect lawn with satisfaction. The Kentucky bluegrass stretched like a green carpet, not a weed or imperfection in sight. This was what suburban excellence looked like. She didn't notice the small figure in the neighboring yard, kneeling among the roses at dawn, sprinkling what looked like ordinary garden fertilizer along the property line. Maria worked with the patience of someone who understood that the best revenge was grown, not bought. The ceramic angel watched from its perch, its weathered face holding secrets that Karen Mitchell would soon discover. In the old country, Maria's grandmother had said, the earth always remembered kindness. But it never forgot cruelty. And sometimes, just sometimes, it decided to collect what was owed. The first cracks appeared in Karen's lawn exactly 1 week later, tiny fissures that split the perfect green surface like a broken mirror. By evening, the cracks had spread, creating a network of small tunnels that seemed to pulse with hidden life. Karen stood at her window, watching her prized grass buckle and shift, not knowing that beneath her feet, 200 new residents were just beginning to wake up. Karen Mitchell's manicured fingernails drummed against her granite countertop as she stared through her kitchen window at the disaster unfolding across her once perfect lawn. What had started as a few hairline cracks 3 days ago had exploded into a moonscape of holes, mounds, and trenches that made her yard look like a construction site. Honey, maybe we should call a landscaper, her husband Tom suggested from behind his newspaper, his voice carrying the weary tone of a man who'd learned to tread carefully around his wife's obsessions. A landscaper. Karen's voice pitched higher. With each word. Tom, something is systematically destroying our property. This isn't normal subsidence or grub damage. This is sabotage. Tom lowered his paper, revealing tired eyes and graying temples. Karen, who would sabotage our lawn? And how? Karen's gaze shifted to the Santos house next door, where Maria could be seen tending to her garden, her movements serene and unhurried. The offensive decorations still dotted the landscape, the violation notice had been ignored, the 30-day deadline approaching like a gathering storm. I don't know how, Karen muttered, but I know who. The doorbell's chime interrupted her brooding. Karen opened the door to find Janet Powell shifting nervously on the doorstep, her face flushed with the kind of barely contained excitement that comes with devastating gossip. Karen, thank God you're home. Have you seen the neighborhood Facebook page this morning? Karen's stomach clenched. She'd been avoiding social media since the lawn disaster began, unwilling to face the inevitable comments from her neighbors. What now? Janet thrust her phone forward, displaying a post that made Karen's blood run cold. The post, shared by Maria Santos herself, showed a time-lapse video of Karen's lawn transformation, set to gentle classical music. The caption read, "Nature has such wonderful ways of expressing itself. Sometimes the earth itself decides to redecorate. Seedling #nature finds a way. #organic gardening #community." The video had been shared 43 times in the past hour. The comments were brutal. Calm as a bitch, Karen, read one. Maybe if you weren't so nasty to people, your lawn wouldn't look like a war zone. Another, that's what happens when you mess with a woman who actually knows how to grow things. And the most damning, my cousin's an exterminator. Those look like army ant tunnels. Someone's been very busy. Smirking face, Karen's hands shook as she scrolled through the growing pile of comments, each one a dagger to her carefully constructed reputation. She can't prove anything, she whispered. Karen. Janet's voice was gentle but firm. Maybe it's time to apologize. Make this right before it gets worse. Apologize? Karen's voice cracked like a whip. For what? For maintaining neighborhood standards. For protecting our property values. I won't apologize for doing my job. That afternoon, Karen stood in her backyard, surveying the damage with the intensity of a general planning a counterattack. The holes had multiplied overnight, creating a maze of tunnels that seemed to follow no logical pattern. Strange clicking sounds echoed from within the depths, and occasionally, something dark and quick would dart between the openings. She'd called 3 landscaping companies. The first had taken one look and politely declined the job. The second had quoted an astronomical price for specialized pest and soil remediation. The third had simply laughed and driven away. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter Ashley in Seattle. Mom, what's this about your lawn being on TikTok? Someone sent me a video of your yard with horror movie music. Are you okay? TikTok. Karen's chest tightened. She opened the app with trembling fingers and searched for her address. The results made her knees weak. #Karen vs the ants was trending. Dozens of videos showed her yard from every angle, some set to ominous music, others to comedy tracks. The most popular video, with over 50,000 views, was titled "HOA President Gets Served by Mother Nature" and featured a dramatic voiceover explaining the backstory of her conflict with Maria. The comments were merciless. Teenagers and 20-somethings from across the country were celebrating her misfortune with glee. Someone had even created a #JusticeForMaria. Karen stumbled back into her house, her carefully controlled world crumbling around her. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number for Willowbrook Estates Management Company. Peterson Property Management, this is Linda. Linda, this is Karen Mitchell. I need to file a formal complaint against Maria Santos for property damage and harassment. Oh, Karen. I was actually about to call you. We've been getting some interesting calls about your situation. Karen's blood chilled. What kind of calls? Well, 3 different news outlets have contacted us about a story they are calling HOA Hell. Apparently, your neighbor dispute has gone viral and they want to interview both you and Mrs. Santos. There's also been a petition started online calling for your removal as HOA president. It has over 800 signatures. The phone slipped from Karen's nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. Through her window, she could see Maria Santos watering her flowers, the forbidden decorations catching the afternoon sunlight like jewels. The ceramic angel seemed to be looking directly at her, its weathered face holding secrets that Karen was only beginning to understand. That evening, Karen sat in her home office, surrounded by HOA documents and legal websites. She'd spent hours researching her options, looking for some way to strike back, to regain control of the situation. But every avenue seemed blocked, every strategy rendered useless by the simple fact that Maria Santos was doing nothing obviously wrong. The clicking sounds from her backyard had grown louder, more insistent. When she'd ventured out with a flashlight, she'd seen things that made her question her sanity. Organized movements in the darkness, formations that seemed almost military in their precision. And the eyes, thousands of tiny, reflective points that watched her from the depths of the tunnels. Her research had led her to entomology websites, to articles about army ants and their devastating efficiency. These weren't native species, someone had to have introduced them deliberately. But proving it would require evidence she didn't have and expertise she couldn't afford. A knock at her door interrupted her frantic Googling. Karen opened it to find Dr. Robert Chen, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who lived 3 houses down. She'd always considered him an ally, he'd supported her initiatives and rarely questioned her decisions. "Karen, I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice unusually formal. "I wanted to discuss the situation with Mrs. Santos." "Finally," Karen breathed, stepping aside to let him in. "Someone with sense." "Robert, you've seen what she's doing to my property. We need to take action." "Actually," Dr. Chen interrupted, "I'm here to ask you to resign as HOA president." Karen felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "I've been in touch with several other board members. We are calling an emergency meeting tomorrow night. There's going to be a vote of no confidence." "You can't be serious." "I've dedicated 5 years to this neighborhood. I've maintained property values, enforced standards. You've also alienated half the residents and turned our community into a laughingstock," Dr. Chen said quietly. "The video of your confrontation with Maria has been shared thousands of times. We are getting calls from reporters, from lawyers, from people who want to use our neighborhood as an example of HOA abuse." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "She's destroying my property. She's brought some kind of infestation into our neighborhood." Dr. Chen's expression remained calm, but Karen caught something in his eyes, a flicker of knowledge that made her blood run cold. "Maria Santos is a respected member of our community. She's also a retired biology teacher with a doctorate in entomology. I'm sure any pest issues are purely coincidental." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Biology teacher. Entomology. She'd been so focused on Maria's decorations, on dismissing her as an ignorant immigrant, that she'd never bothered to learn about her background. Never bothered to discover that her quiet neighbor was an expert in the very creatures that were now turning her life into a nightmare. "You knew," Karen whispered. "You all knew what she was capable of." Dr. Chen adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. "I know that Maria Santos is a brilliant woman who's been treated disgracefully by someone who should have been her neighbor, not her enemy. Good evening, Karen." He left her standing in the doorway, staring out at her ruined lawn. The clicking sounds had intensified, and she could swear she heard something else, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The earth remembers kindness. It never forgets cruelty. Your 30 days are up tomorrow. Time to choose, remove the violation, or face the consequences." Karen's hands shook as she deleted the message, but the words burned in her mind. She looked across the yard to Maria's house, where warm light spilled from the windows and the ceramic decorations stood guard over their silent kingdom. Tomorrow night, she would face the neighborhood she'd tried so hard to control. But tonight, she would face something far more terrifying, the realization that she'd declared war on an enemy who'd been planning for battle long before the first shot was fired. In the darkness of her backyard, 200 new residents continued their patient work, following instructions laid down by a woman who understood that some lessons could only be taught. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock, but by 6:30, every folding chair in the Willowbrook Estates Community Center was occupied. Karen Mitchell stood at the front of the room, her usual commanding presence reduced to a nervous fidget as she shuffled through her notes. The faces staring back at her ranged from openly hostile to coldly indifferent, a far cry from the respectful audience she'd grown accustomed to. Maria Santos sat in the third row, flanked by Janet Powell and Dr. Chen. She dressed carefully for the occasion, a simple black dress that spoke of dignity rather than defiance, her graying hair pulled back in an elegant bun. The violation notice sat folded in her purse, 31 days expired and worthless as yesterday's newspaper. Before we begin, Karen announced, her voice cracking slightly, I want to address the malicious rumors that have been circulating about me and my family. The damage to my property is not, as some have suggested, the result of any neighborly dispute. It's clearly the work of vandals. Cut the crap, Karen. The voice came from the back of the room, where Marcus Thompson, a retired police detective, stood with his arms crossed. I've seen the photos. Those aren't vandal holes. That's systematic tunneling by a coordinated insect colony. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's face flushed crimson. Are you suggesting that Mrs. Santos somehow what? Trained insects to attack my lawn? I'm suggesting, Marcus replied evenly, that you picked a fight with the wrong woman. Dr. Chen stood, his voice cutting through the growing tension. According to our bylaws, tonight's meeting has one purpose, to vote on Karen Mitchell's continued service as HOA president. The board has received 17 formal complaints about her conduct, along with a petition signed by 63% of our residents requesting her removal. Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the podium. 17 complaints. About what? About maintaining our standards. About protecting our property values. About harassment, called out Sarah Kim from the second row. About racist comments and discriminatory enforcement of rules. About turning our neighborhood into a battlefield, added Tom Harrison, a young father who'd moved in just last year. About bullying a woman whose only crime was decorating her garden with family heirlooms, Janet Powell said quietly, her words carrying more weight than any shout. Karen's composure cracked completely. Family heirlooms. They are tacky ceramic junk that belongs in a garage sale, Maria Santos finished, rising from her seat. Yes, you've made your feelings quite clear about my grandmother's treasures. The room fell silent. Maria walked to the front with measured steps, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Mrs. Mitchell, you've spent a month insisting that my decorations violate your aesthetic standards. That they somehow diminish our neighborhood's character. But I wonder whose character has truly been diminished here. She gestured to the crowd. Look around you. These are our neighbors. People who've watched you try to force me to abandon pieces of my family's history because they offended your sensibilities. People who've seen you use your position to bully and humiliate rather than serve and protect. Karen's voice rose desperately. I was protecting our property values. I was maintaining standards. Whose standards? Maria's voice remained calm, but her eyes blazed with controlled fire. The standards that say my grandmother's ceramic angel is offensive, but your plastic flamingos last summer were whimsical. The standards that require approval for my butterfly decorations, but not for the Henderson's garden gnomes. The crowd stirred, remembering. Karen's face went pale. You want to know about standards? Maria continued. Let me tell you about the standards my grandmother lived by. She believed that a person's worth wasn't measured by their lawn's perfection, but by their kindness to neighbors. She believed that beauty came from love, not from rules. Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a small ceramic figure, a dove carrying an olive branch. She gave me this when I moved to America. She said it would remind me to always extend peace first, before anger. To give people the chance to show their better nature. She placed the dove on the podium between herself and Karen. I've been trying to give you that chance for 31 days. But some people mistake kindness for weakness. Some people think that because I speak with an accent, because my skin is darker, because my traditions are different, that I can be dismissed. Erased. Forced to hide who I am to make you comfortable. Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Around the room, neighbors nodded, some wiping away tears. You want to know about my decorations? Maria's voice grew stronger. My grandmother's angel survived the Mexican Revolution. It watched over her family through poverty, through loss, through decades of struggle. The mariachi band belonged to my great-uncle, who played music in the cantinas to feed his children. Every piece in my garden carries the story of someone who refused to be erased. She turned to face the crowd. But more than that, they carry the story of survival. Of people who understood that sometimes, when you're pushed too far, you have to push back. My grandmother didn't just collect pretty things. She collected knowledge. About the earth. About growing things. About the delicate balance between creation and destruction. Dr. Chen stood again. Maria, are you saying you're responsible for the situation with Karen's lawn? Maria's smile was serene, almost angelic. I'm saying that nature has its own justice. That the earth remembers how it's treated. And that sometimes, when someone tries to poison the well of community peace, nature finds ways to respond. She walked to the window, gesturing toward the darkened street. Did you know that army ants are remarkable creatures? They are not native to our climate, but with the right conditions, the right nutrients, the right guidance, they can establish temporary colonies. They are incredibly organized, incredibly efficient. And they have an instinct for cleaning up contamination. Karen's legs gave out. She slumped against the podium, her face ashen. You actually... I actually what? Maria's voice was perfectly innocent. Did I order insects to attack your lawn? Did I somehow train ants to tunnel under your property? That would be impossible, wouldn't it? After all, I'm just a woman with tacky immigrant decorations. The room erupted in nervous laughter. Karen looked around desperately, seeking support. Finding none. Even her husband Tom sat in the back row, his face buried in his hands. However, Maria continued, I am a retired biology teacher with a doctorate in entomology. I've spent 40 years studying insect behavior, ecosystem balance, and the fascinating ways that nature responds to environmental stresses. I've published papers on integrated pest management and organic soil remediation. I've consulted with the EPA on sustainable farming practices. She turned back to Karen, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. And I've learned that every action has consequences. Every cruelty leaves a mark. Every attempt to diminish others ultimately diminishes the one who does the diminishing. Karen's voice came out as a croak. What do you want from me? I want you to understand that this community doesn't belong to you. It belongs to all of us. The family from Somalia who moved in last month. The elderly couple from Korea who've been here for 20 years. The young Latino family with 3 children who just bought the house on Maple Street. We are all part of this neighborhood story, and our stories matter. She picked up the ceramic dove, cradling it gently. But mostly, I want you to understand that when you try to erase someone's history, someone's culture, someone's right to exist in spaces you think belong only to you, sometimes that person decides to write their own story. Sometimes they decide to show you that they're not as powerless as you assumed. Dr. Chen called for the vote. It was unanimous. Karen Mitchell was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The crowd filed out quietly, the weight of the evening's revelations settling over them like a blanket. Karen sat alone in the empty community center, staring at the ceramic dove Maria had left behind. Through the windows, she could see her house in the distance, its lawn a moonscape of holes and mounds. The clicking sounds had grown louder throughout the evening, and she could swear she saw movement in the darkness, organized, purposeful, unstoppable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tom, I'm staying at my brother's tonight. We need to talk tomorrow about more than just the lawn. Another message, this one from an unknown number, the ants have done their work. Now it's time for the real consequences to begin. Check your mailbox. Karen stumbled outside, her heels clicking against the pavement like a death march. In her mailbox, she found a thick envelope marked Urgent, Legal Notice. Inside was a lawsuit, filed by Maria Santos, represented by a high-powered civil rights attorney. The charges included harassment, discrimination, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of fair housing laws. The damages requested were substantial, but the real blow was the final paragraph. Furthermore, plaintiff seeks injunctive relief requiring defendant to issue a public apology and to display, in her front yard, a sign reading, "In this neighborhood, all cultures are welcome," for a period of 1 year. Karen's laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep and hysterical. A year. A year of public humiliation, of admitting her defeat, of 3 weeks after the HOA meeting, Karen Mitchell stood in her kitchen at 3 a.m., staring through the window at what had once been her prized lawn. The army ants had vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving behind a battlefield of perfectly circular holes that had become tiny gardens. Overnight, wildflowers had begun sprouting from each tunnel opening, native species that seemed to bloom in impossible colors, creating a psychedelic carpet that drew visitors from across the city. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her obsession with lawn perfection had given birth to something far more beautiful than anything she'd ever cultivated. Karen's phone buzzed constantly now, reporters, lawyers, social media influencers all wanting to document her downfall. The hashtag Karen vs the Ants had evolved into hashtag Justice Garden, with thousands of posts celebrating what people were calling nature's revenge. Someone had even created a GoFundMe to help Maria Santos with her legal fees. It had raised $75,000 in 2 days. The lawsuit had been just the beginning. Dr. Chen, now serving as interim HOA president, had quietly initiated an investigation into Karen's 5-year tenure. What they'd found made the discrimination against Maria seem like a minor infraction. Selective enforcement, financial irregularities, abuse of power. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached far beyond garden decorations. Karen's doorbell rang, cutting through the pre-dawn silence. She opened it to find a young woman with kind eyes and press credentials, flanked by a camera crew. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Sarah Rodriguez from Channel 7 News. We are doing a follow-up story on the situation with your neighbor. Would you like to share your perspective?" Karen almost laughed. Her perspective? What could she possibly say that wouldn't make things worse? That she'd been protecting property values when she'd called Maria's decorations tacky immigrant nonsense. That she'd been maintaining standards when she'd wielded her HOA position like a weapon. "I have no comment," Karen said, but as she moved to close the door, she caught sight of something that made her blood freeze. Across the street, Maria Santos stood in her garden, surrounded by her ceramic treasures. But she wasn't alone. A group of children from the neighborhood had gathered around her, listening intently as she pointed to different flowers and spoke in animated tones. Actually, Karen heard herself say, "I do have something to say." The reporter's eyebrows shot up. "Really? Would you like to do this inside?" Karen shook her head. "No. If I'm going to do this, it should be here, where everyone can see." The camera rolled as Karen stepped onto her front porch, her bathrobe pulled tight against the morning chill. Behind her, the wildflower wonderland that had replaced her lawn created a surreal backdrop. "My name is Karen Mitchell," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 months ago, I was the president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I thought I was protecting our neighborhood. I thought I was maintaining standards. I was wrong." She paused, gathering courage she didn't know she possessed. "I targeted Maria Santos because her garden decorations offended me. But the truth is, they didn't offend me because they were ugly. They offended me because they were different. Because they represented a culture I didn't understand and didn't want to understand." The reporter leaned forward. "Are you admitting to discrimination?" "I'm admitting to being a bigot," Karen said simply. "I'm admitting to using my position to bully a woman whose only crime was honoring her family's heritage. I'm admitting to being the kind of person who makes communities worse, not better." Across the street, Maria had stopped talking to the children. They were all staring at Karen now, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. "I can't undo what I've done," Karen continued, tears streaming down her face. "I can't take back the words I said or the pain I caused. But I can tell you this, Maria Santos is a remarkable woman. She's a teacher, a scientist, a grandmother, who's dedicated her life to making the world better. She deserves respect, not harassment." She deserves to be celebrated, not silenced. The reporter pressed on. What about the allegations that Mrs. Santos used her scientific knowledge to retaliate? Karen's laugh was bitter. Are you asking if she somehow trained army ants to destroy my lawn? If she orchestrated this whole thing as some kind of elaborate revenge plot? She gestured to the flowering landscape behind her. Look at what grew from the destruction. Look at the beauty that emerged from the chaos. If Maria Santos did this, then she's not just a teacher, she's an artist. And maybe, just maybe, she's shown us all what real justice looks like. The camera captured Karen's breakdown, her admission of guilt, her recognition of Maria's superiority. But more than that, it captured the moment when a woman who'd spent years building walls finally tore them down. Later that morning, Karen stood in her destroyed kitchen, surrounded by the detritus of her collapsing life. Tom had filed for divorce, taking their daughter Ashley's college fund with him. The HOA investigation had uncovered enough financial irregularities to warrant criminal charges. Her real estate license was under review, and her social media presence had been obliterated by an army of outraged strangers. But the worst part wasn't the public humiliation or the legal consequences. It was the silence. The complete absence of support from people she'd thought were friends. The realization that her years of leadership had been nothing more than institutionalized cruelty. A soft knock interrupted her self-pity. Karen opened the door to find Maria Santos standing on her doorstep, holding a small ceramic figure, the dove with the olive branch. I saw your interview, Maria said quietly. I wanted to return this. I think you might need it more than I do. Karen's hands shook as she accepted the small gift. Why are you being kind to me? After everything I've done? Maria's smile was sad but genuine. Because my grandmother taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to break the cycle of hurt. You can't change what you did, but you can choose what you do next. She gestured to the wildflower garden that had replaced Karen's lawn. Those flowers. They are not just beautiful, they are functional. They'll feed the bees, prevent soil erosion, and provide habitat for birds. Sometimes destruction can lead to creation if we are willing to let it. Karen looked at the ceramic dove, its tiny olive branch a symbol of peace she'd never learned to offer. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be better. Start small, Maria suggested. Plant something. Grow something. Show your neighbors that you're willing to nurture instead of destroy. After Maria left, Karen stood alone in her kitchen, holding the dove and staring at the business card Maria had pressed into her hand. It was for a community garden project, a volunteer organization that taught sustainable gardening to underserved neighborhoods. That afternoon, Karen called the number. The woman who answered was initially skeptical, everyone had seen the news, but agreed to let Karen volunteer for the weekend cleanup at the elementary school garden. Saturday morning found Karen on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds alongside a group of parents and children who eyed her with undisguised suspicion. Her manicured nails broke, her designer clothes stained with soil, her carefully constructed image crumbling with each handful of dandelions. Why are you here? Asked a young mother whose daughter attended the school. Karen paused, a clump of crabgrass dangling from her fingers. Because I need to learn how to grow things instead of destroying them. Because I need to understand what I've been missing. The woman studied her for a long moment. My name is Rosa. Rosa Santos. Maria is my mother. Karen's heart stopped. Of course. The daughter who'd defended her mother on social media, who'd inherited her grandmother's spirit and her mother's strength. I'm sorry, Karen whispered. I'm so sorry for what I did to your mother. Rosa's expression softened slightly. My mother says that gardens teach us about second chances. That even the most damaged soil can be restored with patience and care. She handed Karen a small seedling. But you have to be willing to do the work. Every day. Even when it's hard. Karen accepted the fragile plant, its roots wrapped in protective soil. What is it? Forget-me-nots, Rosa smiled. My great-grandmother's favorite flower. She said they reminded her that some things are worth remembering, even when they hurt. As Karen planted the tiny seedling in the school garden, surrounded by the community she tried to exclude, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not for redemption, she knew that would take time she might not have, but for the possibility of growth, of becoming someone worthy of the second chance she'd been offered. The ceramic dove watched from her kitchen window, its olive branch pointing toward a future that would require Karen to prove, day by day, that even the most poisoned soil could bloom again. The 200 army ants had done their work, but the real transformation was just beginning. And in Maria Santos' garden, the ceramic angel smiled, knowing that some lessons are worth teaching, even to those who seem beyond saving.